You're on the road beyond. Welcome, Facebook Live and our audience on YouTube. I'm Todd Duplantis, and we've got a great show lined up. We're going to be talking about the hollow earth. But right now, my hollow co-hosts, Ike McFadden, Pete Haviland. Ike, good to see you again. Well, okay, he's going to unmute his mic, and we'll just go with that. Okay,
sorry about that.
Things off right.
As you said, hollow co-host. So yeah, that was the best I could do.
Pete, how are you this evening?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, we're looking forward to this. You know, back in the 70s, when I was just a wee lad, I did have a chance to read this book on the hollow earth. I was trying to search for it on Amazon today, couldn't find it, but I remember reading a book about the hollow earth. I was fascinated by it because to me, it seemed like legend, but it seemed logical. That's where, hey, UFOs could come from. These mysterious portals that lead to the inner earth that could explain the Bermuda Triangle. Just so many possibilities. Bigfoot, he could be going to the hollow earth. Ike, you also have an experience with some things from the hollow earth.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about this before the show in that years ago when I was working in Los Angeles, I read a script that I don't think was ever published or produced, but it was about, I believe, as far as I remember, it was about the Nazis searching for the hollow earth. And it was actually, while that was all interesting, I started to look into it a bit. And there is some history to it. A lot of explorers have legitimately thought that there was, say, a hole somewhere on the planet where you could get inside it. And there was a whole biosystem in there. So there's actually an interesting story behind it.
Pete, your thoughts on the hollow earth? I mean, this is obviously something you've read up on.
Well, I find it very, very fascinating. I can't remember if it was it Admiral Byrd? That claimed in his journals that he found that place.
Yeah, and, he actually, from what I read, he believes he went through it and saw dinosaurs, things like that.
Now, was it Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth you were talking about?
It could have been inspiration for that. But our guest tonight is all about the hollow earth theory, Ike.
That's right. We have Chris Baird with us. He's a researcher who loves earth science, and he became interested in some inconsistencies he felt he found in traditional science, the traditional way we think about the earth in geography and geology. In late 2010, he began researching giants, and during that, he stumbled upon this little-known hypothesis that the earth was indeed hollow. So Chris began researching the topic, and during a trip to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, he stumbled across a lot of images showing what appear to be polar openings, not just on Earth, but also potentially on other planets in the solar system.
And of course, Chris, since then has been some assistance of fellow researcher and friend Stephen Sindoni. He worked on finding out the inner workings of hollow earth. In this process, it opened many doorways into not only understanding hollow earth, but using it to unlock and explain gaps in previous research put out by others. Chris Baird is joining us on the show tonight to talk about the hollow earth theory. Chris, welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you.
First, let's talk about the hollow earth theory for people who are just joining us going, hey, what is this all about? Let me ask you one question. What exactly would a hollow earth interior look like in your mind? What do you theorize it? And how is it supported? I've always thought, is the sun in the middle? That's the core of the earth. How does it look?
Well, there's two different hypotheses. And the first one was put out in public by Sir Edmund Halley of Halley's Comet in 1492, I believe. And his idea was like a Russian nesting doll, where you would have layers, almost like an onion with every other slice cut out. And he proposed that. And of course, people were like, no, they would be, as the earth turned and the moon pulled, all these inner layers would be slamming into each other. And how would they be inhabited if there was only a star in between? How would all the other layers be inhabited? The traditional thinking of hollow earth nowadays, and what I go with, is based off of a novel called The Smoky God, which is a biography of a sailor that sailed in 1829. And a lot of the information that was given in this book, I was able to look at it rationally and figure out that, it definitely worked. But basically what it is you have, at the beginning, when a planet is forming, you have gases that turn into liquids, and those will rotate around. And the most dense, heavy metals that are radioactive will end up at the very center of the planet, followed by less dense, less radioactive materials. And the crustal materials themselves will be on top of that, the lighter, floaty stuff. And a bubble shaft will form from the north and south pole where it's spinning the axis. And eventually those bubbles will burst all the way down to the core, leaving a shaft from the bottom and the top down to that core. Over a process of time, as the outside is cooling, the inner material is still exiting the poles, which causes a good thick amount of material around that opening and causes a crater-like ridge on the planets. We see that on Mars. You'll see craters at the North and South Pole plugged with ice. And eventually those shafts, they work their way and separate from the core. And that's when the core becomes a center star. And the cold atmosphere from the outside exchanges with the inner atmosphere at the primary or polar vortex. But there's a secondary vortex that works its way down to this metallic core. And that's what starts our magnetosphere. This is something Stefan and I discovered. I call it the Stefan Chris lines of cooling. One day he mentioned, what about air conditioning? Because we were trying to figure out how the core itself worked. Mm-hmm. And it made perfect sense. This cold air goes down and penetrates into the core, and it causes these lines of cooling that create the lines for magnetism, okay? And then it exchanges into heat to the other surfaces. The core itself, or the center star, is radioactive, but it is not large enough or lacks the mass to implode into nuclear activity like an external sun. So its primary heating method is radiant versus radiation.
So it could support life within that area.
Exactly. There's enough radiation for plant life. And basically you have the center star, and it will have a little bit of atmosphere still around it. Then you have inner space. Then you have inner atmosphere, which is miles and miles taller than our outer atmosphere. And then you have the inner crust, the mantle below that, the outer crust, the outer atmosphere, and outer space. So basically, there is gravity in the crust, mm-hmm. and it works both ways. So you have gravity on the outside pulling down towards that mantle, and then on the inside, it's pulling down in the opposite direction towards the mantle. And so the beings that are walking inside the crust are held down by centrifugal force and that gravity. But there's a greater gravity at the center star itself. And because of this, beings naturally over time tend to get larger. Towards the polar areas, Olaf Janssen describes men that are in a 9 to 12 foot size and height. But later when he travels to the city of Edon, in the capital of Asgard, the land of Asgard, Agartha, he describes the people as being upwards of 15 to 16 feet tall. So that would be a thinner region of the crust. In other words, the thicker regions are at the poles where all of this material built up.
So, Christopher, this is a fairly detailed and specific kind of picture you're laying out for us. Is, aside from this particular book, I mean, I assume, is there any evidence, anecdotally or otherwise, in the last, 100 years that people have run across either these entrances or even some of these readings that might explain some of this? I mean, because this is an entire sort of cosmology you're describing here, and it seems like there'd be some indication of it.
The problem is that in my research, nobody was trying to explain the hollow earth when I first got into it. They were saying that there was a hollow earth. They were somewhat describing it, but they weren't describing the science behind it, such as the center star itself has a day and a night, and it's represented by the mandala of the yin yang in Tibet. The reason it has a day and night is because there is slag on the surface, and the slag faces the outer sun, or the greatest point of gravity. And so their day is opposite of ours inside the earth. Their seasons are opposite, and also their polarity is opposite, because when you travel north and down into the earth, you're traveling still north down towards the South Pole. Everything's kind of opposite, but the only thing that's wrong with what everybody says out here is that it's a living place. It's a terrarium for life inside of planets. Now, as far as specifically anybody else speaking about this, there was John Simes, and John Simes was a gentleman who went around proclaiming the hollow earth. He had been in the Navy and said that there was this secret about the hollow earth. But as far as the science part of it, a big majority of it really does come from this book, the biography, The Smoky God. Right. Stefan Sidoni, my colleague, actually lives in New York, so I challenged him to look into Olaf Jansen, and he did, and he was able to find not only where Olaf Jansen lived in Chicago and LA, as proclaimed in the book, but also the whaler that picked him up after his boat capsized on the surface. He was stuck on a iceberg, and his man was Angus McPherson, and he was a whaler, and he was able to find that sailor in that whaling ship as well. So as far as a lot of people talking about this, no, there isn't. And I have myself have run into a myriad of problems trying to present this information. When I would start teaching, my counters were held back, or my videos didn't work right, or weren't viewable to everyone. Even now, more recently, I started trying to teach on TikTok last month, and I had somebody that said they were my friend. They tried to get a hold of me, said, could you get me this code for this to help me get back into my Facebook? And I thought, oh, sure, no problem. Turned out that the code was to Yahoo code to my Facebook account, where they took over my Instagram completely, and I barely got my Facebook back. Wow. This was a purposeful attempt by a hacker to shut me down.
Yeah, that scam's been going around. I've been reading a lot more about that. Let me ask you this, Chris, because we were talking with our last guest on the show about the Nephilim and the Anunnaki. Mm-hmm. You talk about possible giants emerging or being in parts of the center Earth. Do you think that could explain the Nephilim, which were supposed to be giants, the offspring of the Anunnaki mating with humans? Do you think that was the case?
Okay, so yeah, the biblical side of things, but that was a big thing I thought about as a child, the firmament, which it describes in the Bible as a pillar of light in the water, in the midst of the water that separates two waters, the water of the surface and the water underneath the earth. It doesn't quite describe it that way, but when you look into it, you understand it better. Also, Adam and Eve were cast out of the Garden of Eden, but when Cain was cast, he was cast back into the earth and away from his family, and he was afraid of everything in there. And then again, like you're talking about in the story of Noah, it mentions in some Bibles giants, in other Bibles it mentions Nephilim.
Yeah.
And according to this, there's supposedly the Nephilim are the offspring of humans and what we would call fallen angels to the earth. But I have also looked into Zechariah Sitchin and the Sumerian tablets that talk about that the Elohim or Nephilim of Nibiru, they had problems on their planet where they needed gold to protect their atmosphere. That, or they tried to bomb their surface, which failed, and it left it pockmarked, and it has sooty bands, and it looks like wormwood. And so when it mentions wormwood in the Bible, it's talking about the exterior of Nibiru, but they lived inside their hollow planet. But anyways, they flew here, and the ones that flew here were given the title Anunnaki, and that meant heroes of Anu. It was a slight against Allelu, the original dethroned king that flew here and found Earth and found the gold. But it meant heroes. And then the ones that went to Mars later were called Agigi. And they, in turn, created humans, according to them. They created humans or made a human out of a variant of ape that they caught. The first ones failed. They weren't very logical. They weren't easy to control. So they wiped out that first series and they made a second series. And the second series was so desirable that they started sleeping with them. And the first born man was named Adapa and supposedly was flown to Nibiru, but he wasn't allowed to eat anything but earth food because they were afraid that he would gain some kind of everlasting life. So are the giants inside the earth, the Nephilim, the Anunnaki? I can't attest to that, but I don't believe so. I believe that Gilgamesh was the last half human, half supposedly God, right, that was left on Earth. And I haven't really delved in all the kings that were supposedly those half-breed human type kings. Myself.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead. Oh, okay. This is Pete. Do you think that some of what we're seeing now with the UFOs and things like that, do you think they're coming from within the Earth itself?
I believe a lot are. I believe a lot are actual technologies that the Germans and later the Americans geoengineered from crashes. I believe Roswell was a big one, a big cover up personally. But yes, I read an article about Hollow Earth, and I can't remember where it was, but it said in that up to 800 intelligent species would be visiting our inner planet at all times. Another thing is the Hopi Indians talk about the Hopi Blue Star prophecy and them having lived with the ant people in the earth. Now that would be intercrustal earth. That would be above the mantle and perhaps below the mantle, but not in the hollow earth itself. And supposedly they mine salt, which is very valuable inside of planets because the aquifer brings out fresh water. And so salt deposits are on surface of planets. So that would be a very valuable commodity to the people of not only the ant people, who could in turn trade that to the inner earth to be shipped off world. It's just a very valuable commodity. In return, they were supposedly given gold, and they would store that gold for the Sky Brothers. And so when you add that into Zechariah Sitchin and all that, were they really saving the gold for the Anunnaki and the Nephilim, who had possibly been kicked off the planet by the Titans? It gets really involved there that there was possibly a war pre-flood to eradicate the Anunnaki and the Nephilim off of our planet, but they were still allowed to collect the gold that was here. Who knows if all of these stories are true, but they do kind of interconnect and support one another.
And Ike, these are all going back to mythology, which you're familiar with as you spent a lot of time in Greece.
Yeah, well, there's a lot here. Just to let me catch up here. So at current, is there some transit between this inner part of the Earth and the exterior? Like, can things or people come and go, or is it totally separate, or what? How does that work?
As far as I know, the only person to have sailed in and out in public was Olaf Jansen. He spent 27 years in an insane asylum for mentioning his story to his uncle, who wanted his lands because he thought he was dead. As far as places that you could possibly enter, there's definitely the North Pole opening, which is where I believe that Admiral Byrd flew, because he mentions mastodons. Unfortunately, in his secret diary, he was at the time listed in that diary, he was actually at the South Pole and would have just been leaving the South Pole and ending up in Australia. But some other places are Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. There's a cave in Brazil, which supposedly the Germans took over. And then there is Potala Palace in Lhasa, Tibet. And that one the Chinese took over and ousted the true Dalai Lama, who's now in India. I don't know the name of the cave that's in Africa, but supposedly there's one there. And supposedly Australia is the only one that doesn't have a cave entrance into the Hollow Earth, but that might be wrong. It might have been found and covered up. There are multiple openings in the water on the Earth. You mentioned Bermuda at the beginning of this. One of you did.
The Bermuda Triangle.
There was a gentleman who flew into a storm over the Bermuda, or actually the Jamaica area, was heading towards Florida. He entered into a wormhole type thing and it cut an hour off of his flight. You can look into that. And I believe that these wormholes are not really wormholes. I think they're in a storm, they're just moving air through the storm. But from opening to opening, you can look from space and you'll see where air, like these white clouds interconnect the spots. And then there's like a face-like structure and a spiral down to the water. And they cover the water area pretty well, but over by Bermuda, there's one. In Baffin Bay, there's one. At the North Pole, there's one. Over England, there's one. And these all interconnect. And I call them HEOVET, which is Hollow Earth Opening Air Exchange Vortex Tubes. And I believe that the Cold War was all about being worried that the Germans were going to come out and fight us again. And I do believe that some of Operation High Jump, where Admiral Byrd went down, that he did try to fight the Germans, and that the Inner Earth Fleet possibly came out and decimated his fleet.
Wow.
What's interesting and really quick about that, I know you guys are limited on time, I found that the ancient symbol for peace is the reverse swastika of what they used in Germany. And a lot of Hollow Earth people believe that Hitler saw himself as the exterior beings, or the exterior race, the divine race of the opposite of the Hollow Earth people. So
some incredible work, Chris. Fascinating subject. For people who are looking more on this, you have a Facebook group which discusses this. Where can they find you on Facebook?
It's actually in a group called Giants, Titans, and Mardukans, and then in parentheses, Petrified Flesh Remains. And it has a lot to do with Hollow Earth, but also the revolution of mud fossils by Roger Spur. He came out about the same time I did. I was trying to go down the Giant's path and fell in the Hollow Earth. He continued down the Giant's path and found that possibly there's petrified rock remains of humans. And so I delve into that a lot and have possible explanations as to how that could have occurred and the flood could have occurred. And that's in the group.
Chris, we appreciate you joining us on the show tonight. Fascinating subject, a lot to unpack. Thanks a lot, Chris Baird.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. Ike, Pete, you know, it really does blow your mind. There's a lot to talk about there. Wow. You know, I mean, it kind of ties in, answers a lot of questions. Where do the UFOs go? Could they be going in the Hollow Earth, Pete?
Well, you know, I've talked to, you remember, you know, Daryl Sims. We've had him on our show quite a few times.
Good friend of ours, yeah.
And yeah, Daryl has always told me that that the aliens have always been here.
Yeah,
it's not so much of coming from outer space. So we had a discussion a long time ago about maybe having places under the water.
Yeah.
If it's a possibility of being in Earth, I don't know. I don't know. Anything's a possibility these days.
And Ike, we mentioned the Nazis and Hitler in the last show. We discussed them briefly in this show. You know, there's always been a theory that after World War II, they possibly did go hide a number of their weapons and conduct a secret space program and operate in Antarctica. And the theory has always been that they have been underground in some shape or form somewhere, whether it be Antarctica or inside the Hollow Earth.
Yeah, I think it was actually Argentina they were alleged to go to, but I'm trying to think about what I can, the underworld in mythology is usually viewed as a place of, it's not the afterlife, but it is after this life. It's associated with death and rebirth. And psychologically speaking, it's usually associated with the unconscious mind,
right.
The part of ourselves that is very active, but we don't know about, and that actually moves us forward in a lot of ways. And there are a lot of heroes, even a lot of religious figures that go into the underworld in some fashion to do some kind of task, and then they come back differently. And so that's sort of a typical hero's quest. I think Jesus, he went into the desert, he died and came back. You see that in Egyptian mythology, I think, with Set. So it's an interesting thing.
It's a lot to talk about. Okay, we're going to get close to wrapping up the show. We've got a few stories we're going to talk about. Here's a look at some of the weird, tantalizing, and just plain bizarre stories posted from our partners at the Full Spectrum Project. Follow them on Facebook. Ike, do you have a story for us tonight?
I've got a sort of a story and a bit of a question. I didn't have an answer to this, but I'm curious about what you guys have heard, you and Pete. There have been these stories going around about people getting COVID vaccines, and then believing that they have become magnetized in some fashion as a result of that. And I don't think, there was some story about there was something in the vaccines, graphene or something. Do you guys know what the story is behind that, or what it's supposed to be?
I've seen some things posted on in social media regarding this. Pete, haven't you posted something in the Full Spectrum Project about this?
I don't recall, to be honest with you. It's first time I've heard of that.
Oh, really? No, there's a whole batch of people who are saying, "Oh, we took the vaccine, and look, there's a spoon, and it's sticking on my face now." I'm not making that up.
See, after I got the vaccine, I did come home, and for some reason, spoons started sticking to me, and I went to eat. Now we had forks on me and all that, but that's a whole different story.
We'll have to chalk it up to one of the other mysteries of the universe, I guess.
Ike, you mentioned Jesus a second ago, and I've got a story for you involving Jesus. This next story comes to us from it's allthatisinteresting.com. Fascinating website. It's titled, "A Scientist Thinks These Ancient Roman Nails May Have Been Used to Crucify Jesus Christ." In Jerusalem in 1990, 2 nails were discovered in the excavation of the tomb of the high priest Caiaphas, who plotted the killing of Jesus Christ. Now, the nails disappeared and were later found by a filmmaker in 2011. Now, in a recent study published in Archaeological Discovery, some scholars are claiming these could be the ones used in the crucifixion of Christ. Follow me now. Just for reference, Caiaphas was the high priest who handed over Jesus to the Romans for execution in 33 AD. As mentioned before, the nails disappeared after they were found in his tomb, only to resurface in 2000 in an unmarked box. So it's putting a lot of pieces of a puzzle together to link it to Christ, but here we go. Okay, let's start with this. The tomb was discovered in 1990. The nails found in the tomb disappeared. These 2 nails appeared in 2000. Bone fragments were found on these particular ones. So scientists are thinking these were used to crucify someone. You following me? Okay, now traces of sediment and fungus that were found unique in the particular tomb in Jerusalem were found on these 2 nails, leading some scientists to claim that the nails came from Caiaphas's tomb. And if these nails were treasured by Caiaphas, then scientists say they must have been used to crucify Christ. So there you go. Ike, your theory?
Who are these scientists exactly who have come up with the fungus in Jerusalem? I want to look it up because it sounds fascinating.
Look under archaeology discovery. That is the Archaeological Discovery. It's the latest edition, and it was a study published by some scientists there. A lot of speculation, but what they're doing is linking these things. It's weird how these nails just kind of disappeared in 1990 and then turned up in 2000. Then through modern technology, they've been able to link them back to this particular tomb because of fungus that was found in the nails.
I tell you, I love modern technology. Now, curious, is it like the Ark of the Covenant? Do these nails have any special powers? If you get them, you put them together, there's a giant light, and does something happen with the nails?
Who knows? Don't know where they are right now. We've got pictures of them, but that's about it. Okay. Pete, you got any comment on that?
Well, real skeptical on it. When I posted it, I thought it was an interesting story, but
yeah,
first of all, we don't have any DNA from Christ, so we don't know if it is truly from that or not. And if it was of that period, there were other people being crucified at the same time as Christ. So who's to say that it might not be somebody else and not Christ?
Could very well be, but would Caiaphas want to save the nails from someone else?
Let me ask you.
Do we even know that it's Caiaphas's tomb?
Yes.
Coffin?
Pete, I'm happy to hear you are skeptical about some things. I'm curious about where the bar is. Like the nail thing, you're skeptical of, but Nazis under the surface of the earth with UFOs.
I found it a very interesting story from Chris. I did.
Certainly that much is true.
But I mean, I don't know how much I don't know. I wouldn't say that I don't believe it, but you really have to kind of show me the possibilities, or at least some type of evidence to say that we could go. People could go into the center of Earth.
What would you imagine? Like, what would that evidence, do you think? What would it look like, do you think?
Well, I liked reading about Byrd's interpretation of what had happened. I mean, Admiral Byrd had a great background, and he was very respected person. So I don't know what he experienced. He must have experienced something, because I don't see him just writing something like that.
Well, his fleet was decimated.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Well, no, that's a good point. I mean, that's a good point that someone who has some kind of background and prestige and education, in theory, they wouldn't just make something like that up. So it is curious. Maybe it's something worth looking into.
It could be something worth looking into. Maybe we'll get another guest on. Pete, find us another Hollow Earth guest. We can talk more about Admiral Byrd.
Sure.
All right.
I will do that.
Okay, so leaves it open, and that's kind of the point of the show. We want to throw the information out there. We'll discuss it. We'll toss and turn with it, but it's ultimately up to you, the viewer or listener, to decide which way to go with this. Ike?
Yeah, it is an interesting topic, and I wonder, like our last episode, I wonder how much of this stuff is an external reality, how much of it represents something from mythology, how much of it represents sort of a human collective unconscious story that we're telling ourselves that represents something important in the world. No, it's all very interesting.
Well, there you go. We're going to leave it with that tonight. All right, Ike, you want to remind everybody about our social media?
Yeah, so we are on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and Twitter as The Road Beyond Podcast. You should follow us on some or all of those. Make sure you hit the like button and the notification bell so you know when we're doing this again. All
right. Pete, any final comments for tonight?
Yes, we're also at Waffle House.
We're also at Waffle House. My vote is for Huddle House. You guys are all Waffle House fans. Folks, make your own decision when it comes to breakfast food. All right. Also, make sure to subscribe to our Road Beyond podcast on our YouTube channel. Okay. We're going to wrap up the shows for this week. Thanks for being here. We appreciate you supporting us. We'll see you next time on the Road Beyond podcast.